Well, ladies and gentlemen, President Trump may have just passively presented a way to bypass the Senate and take executive action on the Save America Act. Watch this.
A lot of people get hurt.
So let me put an idea in your head, okay? Because it's so hard to get the Senate to do anything. Now they're on recess. They don't get anything done if they never get the Save America Act done. You have the right to declare a national security emergency for elections. And the Supreme Court ruled in 1983 under Reagan that INS versus Chadha, that if you declare a national security emergency as the President of the United States, they can't challenge it. It can only be overturned by a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress. So if you do this in the next month, we will get photo ID, proof of citizenship, and a limit to mail-in ballots. And you don't even need the Senate vote.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
All right, we'll leave it at that. So let me finish with a couple.
Now, that was an interesting answer. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. Didn't say he was going to. But he certainly didn't dismiss it either. And considering how aggressively the president has been pushing Congress to pass the Save America Act, I don't think any of us should ignore what he's trying to, or maybe not trying to relay. So I want to break this down today. Can the president actually declare a national emergency involving election security? And what authorization does the Constitution give him? What authority has Congress delegated? Because, folks, we are facing extraordinary times, and we have extraordinary circumstances that may require some extraordinary decisions. And luckily, we have an extraordinary president. Now, the idea being discussed in the video is President Trump using emergency authority to force changes to our electoral system without having to wait for Congress to pass the Save America Act. Now, these are all issues that we've been dealing with over the past few months. Ideas we've been considering amongst ourselves. Now, President Trump has been pressing Congress, like I said, to pass the Save America Act, but they haven't been functionally able. Now, his administration has also fought for many things like proof of citizenship requirements, voter ID, voter roll verification, and made changes to mail-in ballot procedures. They've also been using federal agencies and databases, really, to pursue election integrity measures. And behind the scenes, many members of the administration have reportedly been examining whether emergency authority by President Trump could provide another avenue. So let me show you again what exactly was said. Okay, so Wayne Allyn Root is the host there, interviewing President Trump on Real America's Voice, and he put the idea directly in front of the president. And again, Trump didn't say yes, didn't say no. And that matters here, okay? Because there are two separate questions. The first one is simple. Can President Trump declare a national emergency to enforce these election integrity or election security measures? And what would happen? And the answer is yes, but there is an important set of qualifications. You see, President Trump did something similar like this in 2018 when he declared that foreign interferences in American elections constituted an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security and American foreign policy. Now, that emergency was tied to specific statutory authorities, including some sanctions and reporting requirements. It did not give the president a blank check to rewrite every election rule in the country, though. But that brings us to the second question. If the president declared a national emergency, would it automatically give President Trump the power to require voter ID, impose proof of citizenship, or restrict mail-in voting nationwide? And that's where Wayne Allyn Root's argument gets a little bit ahead of the law. Okay, a national emergency declaration doesn't create new presidential powers by itself. It would activate emergency authorities that Congress has already created through existing statutes. So in other words, the president still has to identify the law that gives him the power that he's trying to use. The National Emergency Act does not say that declaring an emergency allows the president to impose any policies that he wants. It does provide a framework, though, for activating other statutory authorities. Okay, so the question is not simply can the president declare an emergency, it's what statute would allow the president to use that emergency to impose nationwide voter ID or proof of citizenship or restrictions on mail-in ballots. And I think that is the legal issue. And the Constitution creates another problem for this theory, one that the president, just can simply not take over election rules. Okay. Constitution gives state legislatures authority over the times, places, and manner of congressional elections. But it also gives Congress the power to alter those regulations. Congress, and not the president. And that's why the Save America Act is important here. Okay. Congress is the institution that's being asked to establish these national election requirements. The president can push Congress like he's been doing. He can pressure the Senate, pressure the House. He can use the bully pulpit. He can direct federal agencies, right? But an executive order can't automatically replace the legislation. We already have a real world example of this. Okay. In March of 2025, President Trump signed the executive order directing some pretty major changes. Okay. And the order gave agencies the directive to provide states with access to federal databases where they would use them to verify citizenship and eligibility verification. Okay. But federal courts came out later and blocked portions of that order. And one judge, he permanently blocked the proof of citizenship requirement. Now, that doesn't mean the administration lacks authority to pursue election integrity. It just means the administration still has to stay within the authority that Congress and the Constitution actually provides. Now, the words national emergency don't automatically solve that problem. And look, this is where the story and all this stuff kind of, gets into the details or gets a little bit more interesting. Okay. In July, the White House and has had some officials who have spent months, they had been looking for ways to bypass the Election Assistance Commission and ultimately use emergency powers to force changes to the voting systems. And according to what has been said, officials were examining ways to accelerate these changes involving the voting machine guidance and proof of citizenship requirements and some other election priorities. And the report also said that officials had considered whether a national emergency would provide another route. So I guess when the host, Wayne Allyn Root, goes on TV and tells President Trump to declare a national security emergency for elections, he wasn't, inventing that idea out of thin air. He may have been publicly saying what the administration had already been doing and discussing in private. But when Trump answered, stranger things have happened. There's where it gets, makes one more part of the argument something that we need to examine. Okay, it was the INS versus Chadha. Okay, the host told President Trump that if he declared into the national emergency, Congress could not challenge it unless 2/3 of both chambers voted to overturn it. And that's not exactly how it works. Okay, that case was a 1983 Supreme Court decision involving the legislative veto. The court ruled that Congress could not take certain actions through a one-house veto without following the constitutional requirement of bicameralism and presentiment or something like that. And that decision, it ultimately turned into Congress amending the National Emergencies Act. Now, today, Congress can pass a joint resolution terminating a national emergency, but that resolution goes to the president. And if the president signs it, the emergency would end. But if he vetoes it, Congress would then have to vote and get 2/3 in both houses, in order to override it. And that's where the 2/3 number comes from. Doesn't mean the president cannot be challenged in court. Doesn't mean that if the courts lose jurisdiction, and ultimately doesn't mean every action takes an emergency under an emergency automatically becomes legal. Those are all separate. Okay. Imagine President Trump declaring an election related emergency. Congress would pass a joint resolution to terminate it. President Trump vetoes that resolution. And unless Congress can override the veto with a 2/3 vote in both chambers, the emergency would remain in effect. And that is a pretty serious political obstacle. But the courts could still review what the administration does under that emergency. And if the president issued an order saying every voter in America must present proof of citizenship because he declared a national emergency, someone would likely be in federal court immediately. Okay. And the administration would then have to answer the question, what statute gave the president that power? The administration has a statute that clearly answers that question, then this becomes a much more serious legal conversation. Enter Will Scharf. But if the emergency declaration is being used as a substitute for statutory authority, the declaration itself would not probably be enough. So, look, let's get back to President Trump's answer. Okay, stranger things have happened. Now, I wouldn't interpret that as the president announcing that he's going to declare an emergency, because he would just say it. Okay, but also wouldn't dismiss it, because there are now, I'd say, 3 pieces sitting on the table. He wants the Save America Act. He has examined whether or not the authority that he has could bypass the normal election administration processes. And when he was asked publicly whether declaring an emergency to force election integrity measures would work, he left the door open. Now, that doesn't mean or prove that he's made the decision, but it also doesn't prove that the legal theory would work. But it does tell us that this idea is not purely hypothetical. So I wouldn't leave it off the table. Like I said, extraordinary times, extraordinary circumstances, extraordinary decisions, and an extraordinary president. He may have to make decisions that he feels fit within the bounds of his authority as the president. Because I would argue that our founding fathers never, ever, ever thought that we would rely on electronic voting systems to prove our citizenship, or that foreign nations would spend billions of dollars wanting to overturn our elections. They were cognizant of the fact that foreign influence could impact our process, because we left England, right? But on the grand scheme of things, this may be a moment in time where the president has to do something extraordinary and fight to see how it plays out. And I will be quite honest with you. I would support such decision. I really would. I don't think that, as much as I believe in our Constitution and our founding fathers and the Federalist, all that stuff, I think that we're witnessing things in today's age, and we've witnessed things over the past few years that were not predicted. We're not predictable. And it's going to take some bravado and a strong moral compass and strength to persevere and make sure that we don't lose our sovereignty to loopholes on paper. But I'd like to hear what you think. Do you think the president and the White House should begin describing election vulnerabilities as unusual and extraordinary threats? Do you think the president should start talking about a specific statute that could provide him authority beyond the SAVE Act? And ultimately, do you think the president should begin talking about foreign interferences a little bit more, voting machine vulnerabilities, or maybe non-citizens voting as national security issues? And most importantly, do you think President Trump actually will issue a declaration? And if he does, would you support it? Because if he does, the fight over saving America becomes something much bigger than an act. Much bigger. It'd become a constitutional showdown on how a presidential emergency power would extend into American elections going forward. And again, Trump didn't say yes, didn't say he was going to do it, but he didn't shut down the idea. Stranger things have happened.